I'm talking to a bunch of product managers, so I thought I would not create slides. Um, so I'm just going to wing it and see how this goes. Also, the title Thinking Big, I made that up before I had to talk, so ignore that part. Um, uh, what was I going to talk about? So I was going to tell you a few stories and try to just talk about what I thought one of the biggest lessons that I've ever had in my career that I've really learned over and over again. And so I'd start out by saying the statement that the path to success is never a straight line is probably something everybody in this room would agree with. Every great product has had features that didn't work. Every great company has had fits and starts. Every chart that's up and to the right over years, if you zoom in, there's flat areas and there's maybe dips here and there. So we all know that. And the question is, how do you manage that change? So I was going to tell you about a couple of the zigzags in my career and then sort of a lesson that I take from those that I wanted to impart. So the first story starts out the year 2000. The product is Blogger. It helps people type things into the internet. And Blogger is going pretty well. This is a great year so far. We launched it in 1999. We raised money in April of 2000. It was $500,000. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. It was going to last forever. The product's growing. We're ramping up the team. 6 months later, we're running out of money. There's no capital chasing fledgling consumer internet startups anymore. The bubble had burst. We had a big decision to make. And it was a decision that a lot of people were doing at the time with consumer web companies, which was pivoting to enterprise. And in Blogger's case, this actually had some logic to it. We had many requests that people had emailed us about getting Blogger inside their company. And we even had a pilot customer for enterprise Blogger that we were testing out at Cisco. And there was a lot of desire from both potential customers as well as most of my team to go down this path. And the team was motivated for a very good reason because they saw it as a path to survival. And that's compelling when you're in a startup. And I was compelled by that as well. But when I really thought about it, I thought, I don't really want to build an enterprise software company. And what I was excited about, the reason I thought Blogger was cool was because our tagline was actually push button publishing for the people. And no matter how successful we were as an enterprise software company, we weren't bringing push button power publishing to the people. So we decided not to go down that path. Who knows if it would have worked or not, but not going down that path definitely meant there was some pain right ahead. And that pain was acute. I ended up laying off my entire team, but I kept going out of a sense of duty and not wanting to admit defeat. And eventually I was able to launch a subscription product called Blogger Pro, and that started paying the bills and then giving me enough money to hire people. And then we sold that company to Google eventually. And that was great. Story number 2 was 8 years after that. It was Twitter. It's a product that helps people type things into the internet. And Twitter is blowing up, and I was the chief product officer. And the product was pretty similar to Twitter as you know it today. But there are a couple of key differences. One, and this will get a little arcane, but you're product people, so you'll appreciate this. There was a difference in how @replies worked. So as you may know, @replies at first, they were not a product feature. They were just a behavior of users. They would start tweets with @ and then a username to indicate they were replying to that user. And this was cool, except it was pretty annoying because if someone you were following was doing a reply and you weren't following that person, then you get this tweet that didn't make any sense, or you'd go track that down, and it's like, well, that's we have an elegant solution to that. We thought we would only distribute those tweets to the people who are following both parties of the conversation, and that would free people up to @reply like crazy, and it wouldn't create all this noise. What we learned was some people considered that bug a feature, and they said, well, that's cool. I like seeing who my friends are talking to, and you're killing the community, and you shouldn't take that feature away. So we did what you do when you can't please everybody, which is you compromise and try to please everybody, which was we created a setting that by default was off, but if you clicked it, then you would see the replies from everybody, all the replies from everybody you were following. So that seemed fine, except that was kind of the worst solution of all, because then a few months later, we still had the confusion. People didn't know how this worked, and we couldn't really explain it because we couldn't say, well, don't worry, those only go to people who are following that other person, because sometimes that wasn't the case. And putting aside the fact that probably that shouldn't have worked that way either. But we had this motto inside Twitter at the time that everything is a tweet, which is kind of dumb because clearly not everything is a tweet, but we liked that. And so we were stuck to that idea that replies should be tweets. They shouldn't be a different thing. So anyway, that was part of why we ended up with that solution. And anyway, so I wrote a blog post and said, here's how @replies work, but it's causing all this confusion, so we're just going to take away that setting. Cool? Great. And it was a good lesson in user behavior and psychology, because as you imagine, when you announce that you're taking away an option from users, they don't think, oh, well, that makes sense. It's probably good for engineering, and probably system as a whole is healthier that way with that simplicity. They think you're taking away my control and my option, and I'm very mad at you. And so there was a movement, there was protests, there was pitchforks, there was a hashtag, and people were mad, and we had this whole thing to manage, and we hadn't even done it yet, but we had just only threatened to do it because we were trying to sort of make it a dialogue. And the funny thing also was we looked up a bunch of people who were protesting, and they didn't have the setting on. Only 2% of people did, but it was a platform-wide, uproar. So we managed through that. We did it anyway. And a few weeks later, of course, all those users had shut up. A few, I remember, had tweeted, oh, this is better. This is cleaner this way. I like it. It makes sense. So that was vindicating. The most controversial thing at Twitter when I was there, and far beyond when I was there, Michael Sippy is in the audience. He will appreciate this. It was the Twitter API. So the Twitter API was probably my biggest strategic error during my time as CEO. And the problem with Twitter API was it was perceived as this massive source of growth and innovation for Twitter. This is probably the most misunderstood product story in Silicon Valley, or one of them, because if you ask people who are paying attention at the time, it's like, oh yeah, the Twitter API is driving all this usage and growth, and it's great because plants are tweeting and fire trucks are tweeting, and all this stuff is great. And we even announced data at the time that said something like 90% of the requests to our servers were through the API. And this was touted as a success of distributed innovation. And the truth was, when we really analyzed it, we couldn't actually see a lot of user growth or value coming through the API. It was a ton of developers who were trying stuff and pulling data out and posting data and spamming and like just going nuts and on hammering the API. And then there were cool sort of experiments and doodads that got a lot of press, but it wasn't actually probably driving much value at all. So we tried to rein this in a little bit, and then there came a time that the iPhone came along and apps came along, and there were Twitter clients that we didn't own and we didn't control, and that looked like success for our API because we didn't have to build these, but actually it was terrible for us and for users because you couldn't find a Twitter client in the App Store, and if you did, because there's nothing called Twitter because they couldn't use our name, and then if you found one, you couldn't create an account with one. And so, to much controversy, which seems insane today, we bought one of the Twitter clients and we made it our own, and we let you create an account. And people were in uproar because we were killing the app economy and all these things that we didn't mean to create. And we tried to send this message that, it's cool, like the API is there, development, but maybe not clients. Maybe we want to do the clients, we want to control the user experience. And there's also this myth that all this innovation was happening on clients because a lot of clients did cool things, but the innovation was superficial. They couldn't actually control the API, so all they could do is interface innovation. And whereas, and we then couldn't do product changes either because we didn't control the user interface. It was bad for everybody. And but it was perceived as a success, so it really created this dilemma for us. So we went through the controversy of buying Tweety and making a Twitter client, but then the API lived on, and Sippy had to deal with that later. So then 8 years after that, I was working on a product called Medium, which lets people type things into the internet. And it's 2016, and we'd been going a couple years, and it was going pretty well. We'd raised, early 2016, we're kind of on a roll. We raised $50 million. Over the course of the year, our traffic close to doubled, and it started out pretty good thanks to this strategy we employed with third-party publishers. We built a product for, and then we started recruiting publishers, and Bill Simmons launched The Ringer on Medium. That became the biggest site. There were some other fairly big sites. And we were working with brands to do native advertising and content marketing. We're building a sales team. And there's just a lot of inertia and a lot of momentum in a direction that seemed pretty clear and actually seemed like it would work. So that was, say, October 2016. January 2017, stopped all that, laid off a third of the company, announced we were doing consumer subscriptions. And there's a headline at the time that kind of encapsulated a lot of the thought for people, both in the company and out, which was, Ev Williams has lost his goddamn mind. I now have that headline taped to my door in my office. I had to wait a while to do that, though, to see if it was true. So that was a scary time. I won't go into all the reasons we did that. I will say 18, 20 months later, the overall traffic is much higher than it was then, despite a bunch of publishers moving off. We're paying thousands of writers. We have a growing editorial team. The content's better than ever. And we have subscribers that are growing like crazy. And so very happy with that transition. So those are the stories that have some similarities. And they're really, in all cases, about change. And so what's the lesson in all this? So go back to that statement that the path to success is never a straight line. Everyone here knows that. And everyone here also knows that we're fallible. We don't always know the right answer. And therefore, the discipline of product development has gotten a lot more scientific, which is a great thing. We are data-driven and we're hypothesis-driven. And these approaches are important, but they don't protect us from never going down the wrong path, whether it's small things like a setting or a large thing like the entire strategy of the company. Those things are still possible. So the question is, what do you do when you find yourself down the wrong path or fearing you might be down the wrong path? And I think it comes down to two things. One is just your judgment and the ability to make a leap of faith, which as product people, I'm sure everyone has exercised that muscle a lot, but where, in my experience, what fucks with your judgment is fear. And so judgment when you have a blank canvas, when you're just starting out or you're going to try a new feature or a new product, is one thing. Judgment in the face of going against what a lot of people think you should do is really, really hard. And this is when I look back at the biggest mistakes I've made or the times when I've made a decision and taken too long to make that decision, it's so often because of fear. And so my message around that is that no one knows what your product should be better than you. And that includes your biggest customers, it includes partners, it includes investors and board members, and it sure as hell includes the press. If you have a boss, hopefully it doesn't include your boss if they're like founder, CEO. But hopefully you can get on the same page. And but so when you're on that page, the question is still what to do, and that fear of going against those expectations and possibly even suffering real consequences, like customers leave or users leave or the growth pauses or stops is really hard to accept, but that's a secondary effect that you can have to get comfortable with. The thing that really makes it hard to think is that fear in my mind. So if you can keep in mind that no one knows better than you the path you should be on, then you can still use data and research and all those things to try and make the best judgment you can, and be willing to suffer the consequences if there are any. Because I just truly believe that great products and great companies require leaps of faith. They require making decisions that you do not have sufficient evidence to support at the time. It requires risk. It requires the willingness to be wrong in front of your coworkers and in front of the press and in front of your boss. Sometimes these things won't work. But if you don't make those leaps of faith, then you're surrendering to incrementalism and mediocrity. There's so many products and companies that got down a path and they did the best they could do on that path, but never became great because they didn't know how to break out of that path. So the essence of your job is really to use your judgment. Good luck.
Okay, we have time for a couple questions. You good?
Absolutely.
Yeah? Okay, cool, great. All right, no pressure. Here we go, Kenneth.
Hi. So, both you and Aaron spoke about, a little bit of the leeway that a, CEO has in terms of using your judgment and deciding what's right. What advice do you have for folks a level down who are looking to take leaps of faith but have to negotiate with, the trust of a CEO or C office?
Good question, because I thought about this. I was really thinking about my team. I gave a talk at Medium recently. I think it's a bit of a culture thing. And you may or may not have the ability to set the culture, but I'm sure everyone in this room can influence the culture. And you got to get in sync with your boss for sure, but what we try to do is create a culture where even you can talk about being wrong. Being wrong has to be accepted in a culture in order to take risks. I gave a pep talk to my team recently that basically I said, we have to remember we're always wrong. And which is not exactly a pep talk, but there's an undeniable truth to life and to creation that you're always wrong about something to some degree. And the worst thing you can do is stand there and wait till you're right. You have to move forward, but it's not just move forward, because I see two behaviors that I try to get people to get past. One is that they're like, we might be wrong, so we're not going to do anything. The other is, we're going that way, and never look around once they're going. And what I was trying to convey is, no, you're wrong, go that way, and then look in other directions while you're going. And but the hardest thing, I think, for if you're not the boss, is you said you're going that way, and you can easily switch. And I think a very disciplined product team is like, in the face of data, we will switch. But what about in the face of a better idea? That's really hard. It's like, we said we were going to go that way, and then the changing expectation may just be among your team. Like, you know what? I got a better idea than that. I'm going to go this way. That's something that I'm really encouraging people. Is like, you know what? A better idea, and not going after, like, we're not going to do the thing that we said we were going to do just because we said we were going to do it, and like always, as Sippy says, always look right on the decision tree. Avoid sunk cost fallacy. That's the harder thing, and I don't know how to get over that other than try to create a culture where that's possible, and you don't say, well, you said you're going to do this, what the fuck? You say, oh, you have a better idea. Let's look forward and be rational about it.
All right, I got one in the back here.
Can you talk about your experience with like Odeo and like what were some of the product lessons you learned there that you carried over to Twitter? I think that would be super insightful.
Cool. Yeah, so Odeo is a company I did in between Blogger and Twitter, and it was podcasting in 2005. Right idea, wrong time. And I think a couple lessons that Biz and I always referred to in that time, which was we were trying to create a couple things, both for listeners and creators of podcasts. The problem was, one of our problems was we weren't creators of podcasts, and we didn't really know what they wanted, and so we were uninspired and unintuitive about that product. And then for listener side, we just got beat by Apple. I mean, we weren't offering any value once they did that. One of the other lessons I came away with was that when you don't have product market fit, don't polish. Polish isn't going to get you anywhere. It was just like, we launched this, one of the last things we did at Odeo after Twitter existed, because Twitter didn't take off like a rocket. It took a while, and so we were doing both for a while. And we came up with this cool new interface that Biz designed, and I coded and co-designed for Odeo, and it was amazing for listening to podcasts on your desktop. No one wanted to listen to podcasts on their desktop, and we already knew that from the less slick version of our product. Kind of basic now when I look back at it. But.
All right, one last question. All right, we'll go up here. Here we go.
Hey, first off, I totally agree, and I tell my teams the same way around, we're definitely wrong, but let's just be a little more right than last time. But
let's be wrong about something different.
Yeah, just don't repeat. Just curious, who do you look up to? Like, who inspires you?
I was in this realm, like Reed Hastings as a CEO, I find very impressive. I will say, just go back a little bit. When I got to Google after Blogger, so the original title of my talk, Think Big, I was going to reference this. I was basically scrapping and scraping by for many years with Blogger, and way before Blogger. And just like always just kind of looking for change in the couch cushions and trying to figure out how to pay rent the next month. And I was always coming from this scarcity mindset. Even though I was creative and wanting to do big things, I was like, I can't do much. And I think that's a habit that you can get into no matter how many resources you have. And when I think about a commonality of the companies and leaders I admire, it is those who come from, whether they have a bunch of resources or not, they come from a position of confidence and an abundance mindset. And so what I was going to say is when I got to Google, the thing that most struck me is that they thought so fucking big. And yeah, they were rich and they were smart, but they did that when they started. And they're just like, web search? No one indexed the whole internet before they did. Like, why wouldn't you index the whole internet? And I got there, they were working on this thing called Google TV, and they were recording all the shows that were being broadcast. And no one had ever done it. Why wouldn't you record all the shows? And just everything they did. Why don't we map the whole Earth? It was just like, oh, you can do that? You can think that big? Why don't we scan all the books? It didn't all work, but it was just their approach to everything was just, we can do this better. And sometimes it was arrogant and sometimes it didn't work, but it was just like, that imprinted me a lot. And I still am impressed by Larry and Sergey and a lot of the Google folks who think that way. And so that's part of what I'm impressed with Reed and obviously Bezos and some of these people who think that way. That's something I'm still working on.
All right, Ev, thanks for a great talk. Let's give him a round of applause. Thanks.
Thanks.